This is Sam Long.
I'm John Nugent.
And I am Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. Glad to have you along. When this podcast is released, it'll be Monday, and that is the week of Restoration Appreciation Week here at the school, where on Tuesday and Friday during our chapel time at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we have in recent years, by we I mean John, has brought in various people to talk about restoration-y things. And so some of our listeners are very familiar with that. Others probably, we've talked about it. They know our background, but it's just an opportunity to hear different things. And so we wanted to remind you that we're doing that. You're welcome to come in person if you're in the Lansing area. You're welcome to tune in on the Facebooks if you have the internet. And I don't know,
It'll be on Facebook Live. How long does it usually last on Facebook Live? Like they're on there for a while and then they drop off at a certain point.
Do they?
I think. Oh, yeah. They don't stay forever.
I don't know.
Couldn't tell you.
I'm not on the Facebooks much, so it's hard to say.
Yeah.
That's that interweb stuff that I know very little about.
Yeah.
So.
He's more dark web.
You have
guy.
it for
big time.
probably a week or two. No
Okay.
more than a month. But I'm pretty sure it sits on there for a while and then it drops off. So, yeah, you could see Frank Viola on Friday and Frank Weller on Tuesday.
Dr. President Frank Weller on Tuesday. And do we know what they're talking about yet?
I know I have.
Yes.
I've read Frank Weller's.
Oh, nice.
And so he's talking about the concept of unity and restoration in the context of humility. So
great.
the necessary attribute of humility for genuine unity and preservation of the restoration vision. So a lot about humility and how
Great.
it ties into the theme. So I have not yet seen Frank Viola's manuscript, so we'll see. But that will be turned into pamphlets at some point, and those will be made available on the Great Lakes website. That takes a while, sometime next year maybe. That'll be available. So yeah, so if you want to participate, zoom in live through Facebook Live or show up.
Yeah, especially Friday, because after chapel, there's a luncheon Q&A with both of the speakers.
Both Franks.
Yeah, both Franks. Do we determine whether it's Frankfurters or not? Or wait, that was my job, wasn't it? I dropped the ball
you're
on
gonna
that.
follow up on
I
that.
did not follow up, so no guarantee of Frankfurters.
So, and a very special thing, just for students in our grad program, there is a breakfast on Saturday morning with everyone in the Master of Practical Theology program with Frank Viola. So kind of one-on-one breakfast time with Frank Viola. Just another perk of being a part of our Masters of Practical Theology program. So maybe you want to join. Maybe next year you could have breakfast with the guest speaker.
Whoever it may be.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, if you had any more questions, you're welcome to drop us a line, and we'll try to answer them. But we'd love to have you out. We try to bring as many people in person for this event as possible, and oftentimes it's pretty well attended, which is great. So if you've never been to the campus, that would be a decent time. Probably the leaves will all be down by then, but it'll still be pretty-ish.
Yeah, we have responses from at least 30 people, I think, who are coming from off-site for the Friday session. So
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great.
do your best to increase that number.
All right. Well, I guess we'll get to it.
Picking up where we left off?
I think so. We actually didn't even do any pre-episode discussion of it, but I think
Right.
we're in chapter 11.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2, verse 11. For those who are just for some random reason picking this podcast to listen to, we're in 1 Peter, and we're just walking through it verse by verse. And so I'm going to do some reading. We didn't, again, split anything up, so if it's wrong, John will yell.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, this is like a new section of the book. Like the book is divided into logical chunks. Section 1, is chapter 1 through 2:10, kind of setting the stage. But this is kind of, I think, the heart and meat of the book. And kind of my title for this section, which is 2:11 through 25, is Cruciformed Witness Among the Nations. Mm-hmm. So what does it look like to be a witness to the nation as those who are called to live their life in the footsteps of Jesus?
Good.
Also, nickname in high school, Logical Chunk. So here we go. Verse 11. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that even though they may malign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge. For the Lord's sake, be subject to every human authority, whether to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet do not use your honor as a pretext. Use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor.
Okay, so yeah, we should have debriefed a little bit before the reading,
We probably should have.
but that's all right. So the first two verses, there, 11 and 12, are kind of like the introduction to this section. Life as witness. And then what follows from that, and this is especially for those who like 3-point sermons or
Right.
messages that have three main sections. You have life as witness first in relation to unbelieving rulers. Then begin in verse 18 in relation to unbelieving master or boss or employer. And then in 21 through 25, you have exposition on the non-coercive example of Jesus. And so 3 logical sections. So you kind of read the preface as well as part 1. So maybe we'll start by talking a little bit about 11 and 12, and then see how 13 through 17 zooms in on the emperor.
Fair enough. So it starts with calling them aliens and exiles, sometimes aliens and strangers in the world. And we've had these conversations about how I wish we would change our mascot to be the aliens because of the rich imagery that's here.
Yeah,
That's right.
This idea that we're different, we're foreign, at least we're supposed to be, that we're in a place, but we're very much not of that place. It's very Men in Black-ish, where they look like everyone else, but actually they're different, and that comes out at different times. And so he's really drawing upon some Old Testament imagery of like resident aliens, of exilic living, and because of that, like if that's the case, he says, then you need to actually be different. And he lists out some things that you should be different in, like desires, abstaining from those desires, and conducting yourselves in certain ways. And so the whole thing is built on their understanding of who they are, aliens and exiles, and the things that flow from that.
Yeah. And I think this is why that he introduced a letter as to the 12 tribes of the diaspora or the dispersion, is he's setting the readers up to see themselves in these terms. I think you make a great point, Sam, that this is how we as Christians are supposed to view ourselves, that we're living in a place, but it's almost like we have a green card. It's like we're not from there. We are not citizens. And everybody's going to know that. I think on the one hand, it's not that we're going to be like really eccentric or something like that, but we're going to stand out because our lifestyle is just not going to look like everybody else. And I think to a degree what we're saying is we do have a citizenship, but it's not citizenship in Rome or the local, environment or whatever, that we have a kingdom citizenship and we live according to those kingdom standards. And this is what is going to inform our conduct. And so we have to embrace that and embrace the fact that it's going to make us look kind of like weirdos. And some people will think it's great and they're like, hey, I'd like to learn more. But there's going to be some people who are going to maybe mock us. Some people will be openly hostile. And I think what Peter's trying to do is to impress upon his audience to embrace all of those possible outcomes and then to interact with people in a way that reflects God's kingdom, in a way that hopefully honors them, but also invites them in to say, if you see something better here, we'd love to have you, come be a part of what we're doing.
Yeah. One thing that stands out to me in verse 11, he just addresses them as aliens and exiles, which he's already set up earlier in the book. So that's not new here, but then this kind of the launch verse for this section is to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. And if we were just hear that phrase, abstain from desires of the flesh, we might go to ordinary professional sins, right? Like sexual immorality or theft or the thirst for material goods, right? The things of the flesh. But that's not where this ends up going.
True.
It's going to go directly in how we navigate our relationship with various unbelieving parties that we interact with, and how we navigate. What does it mean to be an unbeliever? When there's a believer, in the context of an unbelieving emperor. What does it mean to be a believer in the context of an unbelieving master or employer? What does it mean to be a believer married to an unbelieving spouse in chapter 3? And actually, chapter 3 to me is a part of this section as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think I stopped at the end of 2, but I think this whole logical section goes into chapter 3. And so the desires of the flesh in this section are not going to be about like immorality. It's the desires of the flesh are going to have to do with how to negotiate being under an emperor you despise, how to be a Christian when you have an unbelieving master who mistreats you, or what does it mean to be married to an unbelieving spouse. The desires of the flesh are going to have a different context.
Yeah.
About self-preservation, about defiance, about, so desires of the flesh are not always an immoral kind of thing in terms of sexuality or greed or money or physical pleasure, but some of them are going to have to do with learning to relate properly to unbelievers.
Yeah, I think it's implicit that the desire is like for control. Or so you don't want the Roman Empire controlling you. You don't want your woman or your wife doing, there's lots of things in play that no, I don't want people telling me what to do or what not to do. I'm my own person. And that is that's a desire of the flesh that we all have. I don't like being told what to do or not to do. And yet Peter's coming along and saying, and you have to put that down for many reasons. For one, if you are an exile or an alien, you don't have any control. You're not in charge. Right? You don't rule anything. If you're an employee, you're not in charge. And so some of it is just by default, you don't actually have the power. But the other part is but you need to show them the kind of person that you can be, who's not constantly being like everyone else, fighting for control, grasping for anything that's out there. And that's a pretty important witness in our world.
Yeah. And I think that Peter recognizes that there's a general response that slaves seem to take when they're working for an unjust master. That broadly speaking, this is how people respond. They resist in this way or whatever. And he's saying, we're going to think about that different. From a kingdom point of view, when you have an abusive or unjust master, we now have to think differently. The flesh is the way most of these people do it, but God has given us a different vision. If you're married to somebody who is a non-believer, the world might say, this is how you respond. The flesh says, this is how you respond. And he's saying, actually, there's a different way. And so in each of those situations, Peter already knows that the world has a way of handling it. And the kingdom is offering us a different vision and a different response. And again, it's a response that people should look at and say, why aren't you doing what everybody does? I'm seeing something here that's kind of throwing me into the state of cognitive dissonance because you're not doing what I expect. That just creates an opportunity to say, I know I'm not, and this is why. Because I've learned that the creator of heaven and earth has given me a different way of responding. And I want my response to be that living invitation for you to join me in honoring the creator of heaven and earth.
Yeah. So let's see how he pivots now. Did you want to say something more about that?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, on the verse 12 part.
Yes.
That's where you're pivoting to?
I am.
Oh, I thought you were pivoting to 13. Go ahead, John. Hate to interrupt.
Well, so in the context of, abstain from the desires of the flesh, the alternative to that is set forth in verse 12, conducting yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that though they malign you as evildoers, they see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge. So just the desires of the flesh that they have, kind of the antidote to them, and this is generically, right? He's establishing a principle, and then he's going to unpack it in relationship to the emperor, to unbelieving masters, to unbelieving spouses. And so honorable among the Gentiles. And this is framing, I think, in ways that sound a lot like Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, right? A city on a hill, right? But the idea is to live honorably among the Gentiles. And this honorable living is going to be, I think, the theme of how do we relate to unbelieving masters? Well, honorably.
Mm-hmm.
How do we relate to unbelieving spouses? Well, giving honor to them. Like, so honor is kind of the posture that is going against the desires of our flesh, which wants to maybe respond with retaliation, control, like Sam said, or with just subversive acts of defiance, right? To kind of bringing shame to them. And Peter's going to go a different route. That those who are above us in some kind of worldly hierarchy, we want to strike back as exiles and aliens by lowering them. And he's going to cast a fundamentally alternative vision. And I like the way you're going about framing this, Sam, because, I mean, this is the temptation for Christians today, especially in relationship to unbelieving authorities. I mean, we just finished, in the time we're recording this, we're just a couple of days out after the No Kings protest.
Sure.
Right? And so our culture clearly has a problem with the governing authorities, and wants to get a message out about it. And the question is, what does it look like? Does First Peter have anything to say about it, about how we might do it? And we're going to add to that.
Yeah, you mentioned Sermon on the Mount when you read and here verse 12, I think of like Jeremiah, where like this is how you conduct yourselves when you're in exile, and you seek the blessing of people, and you just like you lay down roots, and you're among them, but you're not part of them, but you live such a good life that they, you're looking to seek their blessing, which I think would result in what Peter says, that they may malign you as evildoers. Like, what are these people doing here? Like, yeah, but they sure are pretty nice. And they sure do a lot of nice, good things for us. And so they're not one of us, but they're okay, And I don't know, that's what I thought of that was being read, is like that Jeremiah 29 passage about how they're supposed to live in exile, which seems very similar. Have you done any work on looking at parallels between these?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Jeremiah, seek the peace of the city, is kind of on that Old Testament trajectory from like Abraham, be a blessing to the nations, and like Isaiah, a city on a hill, Jeremiah, seek the peace of the city. It's on this trajectory. Yeah, so Jesus' city on a hill, right, is not brand new.
Right.
He's building on the unique calling of God's set-apart people going back to Abraham. And I think, the Jeremiah passage is an interesting point along that to point out for First Peter, because that's the book where Jeremiah is trying to teach the Israelite people how to live as exiles. So it's perhaps the most fitting parallel of all of them.
Well, and I think that for both exilic Jews and then later for Christians, one of the ways that they really stand out in their culture is their refusal to participate in a lot of like the normal everyday activities of religion and politics, because they were combined together. We're so used to, as Americans, thinking about the separation of church and state, and that's like a big thing, that we don't realize that religion and politics were mutually reinforcing in the ancient world. And a lot of the things that you engaged in your city was going to sacrifices or going to parades, and it's like, we're having a parade that's celebrating Zeus or whatever. And you go out there with your I Love Zeus t-shirt and wave your little flag, a little, obviously being a little bit sarcastic there. But the whole point is that you participate in all those things because what you're doing is you're supporting the city. When we honor Zeus and when we honor our rulers, then our city prospers and we have lots of food, we like economic activity, and all these things are joined together. And when you're like, I'm not going to show up for that, people are like, what's wrong with you? Don't you love Zeus? Don't you love our rulers? Don't you want our city to prosper? And you are seen as an evildoer, like you are outside of the social norms. And are you trying to bring trouble, or are you trying to bring the rulers down on us or the gods or whatever? And you're not even actively doing something. You're just saying, I'm not going to show up for the parade or for whatever. And so because you're doing that, people are like, you're a horrible person, and all this. And so what you want to do is, in the midst of people calling you an evildoer because you're not showing up for these major civic events, is to show them like, no, I actually care about the prosperity of our city. I care about you as people. And so you have to find a way of showing them that I'm not a horrible person. I just think what you're doing is contrary to what the creator of heaven and earth would have us do. So to show them that I'm on your side, that I love you and I care about, like, your prosperity matters to me, I just see a different path to it than what you're thinking. That's a tricky thing to navigate, to try to, in the midst of being called an evildoer, show people how much you love them. And again, I think Peter is going to help us with some very important suggestions on how you can do that.
Yeah. And key thing in verse 12 is where is his motive coming from in all of these relationships? He wants them to act in a certain way toward unbelievers of various stripes so that they might see us, see what we're doing, and come to glorify God when he comes to judge. Amen. Like the motive here is the conversion, I think, right? The conversion of the unbelievers so that they are drawn to Christian faith alongside us by how we act in relationship to them as those who are aliens and exiles. And I think this motive of relate to them in such a way that evangelism to them is enhanced is a different frame, I think, than many Christians bring to how we relate to governing authorities today.
Yeah.
Some relate to governing authorities today, or unbelievers in general, purely out of the motive of self-preservation. Like, I want to preserve my holiness, I want to preserve my distinctness, my rightness, and so I relate to you in a way that, as long as I get to do what I want to do, I'm okay, right? And so it's kind of like there's a self-preservation mentality. Others relate to the government authorities as, I want you to be doing in your role the things that I think are best for the world, right? And kind of like they relate to them from a standpoint of, I want to influence you to be a better you. Of course, as an approach, that's not awful, nor is the first one for that matter. But neither of them are the approach that Peter takes. He wants them to think about their relationship to, and of course we didn't throw out, I want to overturn you, right? And overthrow you and get a better you in place. Like, none of those are their motives. It's like, how can you relate to these people in ways that they are drawn to God through your witness? And they might be found a follower of Jesus when he comes to judge. That's a motive that we need to recover in our day. And so let's see what that looks like in relationship to the emperor. You want to reread 13
Sure.
17 with that frame?
For the Lord's sake, be subject to every human authority, whether to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing right you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. As servants of God, live as free people, yet do not use your freedom as a pretext for evil. Honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor.
Yeah. So this section starts with the emperor and ends with the emperor.
Right.
And that's important. Kind of this is framing that section.
Well, and I think this is something that these Christians are going to really have to wrestle with, because the emperor represents a lot of very anti-Christian things. The emperor was, he was the Pontifex Maximus. He was the high priest of the empire. And so he's saying, part of my responsibility as the emperor is to be the go-between between the people and the gods. And, as Christians, we're like, yeah, we see somebody else in that role.
That's not you.
Yeah, exactly. And so Peter is saying, you need to honor the emperor, even though the emperor is claiming to be something that we outright reject. And how do we do that without being subversive? How do we do that without saying, I'm not trying to kill you or to rebel against you or whatever. I just think that Jesus is the high priest, not you. And some people are going to be like, you're going to die for that. That I don't care what you think. I don't care what a nice guy you are. You're telling me I'm not the high priest. This is not a good thing. Yeah, that's a tricky thing to navigate, to be able to say, I'm going to honor the emperor, even though I don't affirm this idea you have of yourself and what everybody else around you, from the lowest to the highest, is telling you is true.
Yeah. Can you do me a favor? Can you look up the Greek word there for human authority? Be subject to every human authority. I'm pretty sure that's not what it says in Greek.
Yeah, so submit to each human judgment, really, catesis, on account of the Lord. And so, yeah, the word there is catesis. It's dative catese, but it's having to do with like be subject to every human. Trying to think of a better word, not authority, but like when they make a judgment, you're like, all right, it's like as a person in authority, they're going to make decisions, and not all those decisions are necessarily going to be the things that we want, And so it's like with Jesus, if they say you're going to go to the cross, Jesus is like, all right, that's what you say is going to happen. I'll go to the cross. It's that kind of an idea there.
Yeah. So it's like it's a humanly created instrument of justice and judgment, right? It's a human one. Like that's the modifier, right? And
right, yeah.
And then he's going to give examples, whether to the emperor as, the supreme, the head of the chart, or the government, governors as sent by him to punish people or praise certain people. Like, so there's this category of human structures of judgment, of which emperors, like at the top of it, and then governors are, lower, and then under them, there are probably other humanly appointed structures.
Right.
And so I think that's important. Like even though other passages, like Paul will in Romans talk about how, the governing authorities are God's servants. Here, Peter is acknowledging that God uses them, right? They serve his purposes in the world. Peter is emphasizing, but their origin here is of humans.
Yeah.
Right? They're human creations. Like, it's humans who created the institution of President of the United States and the Congress and the Senate and the Supreme Court, right? And then on the state level of mayors and governors and their own Congresses, right? These are humanly created structures. And Christians need to be told to kind of, be subject to them precisely because they recognize that these are humanly attributed authority structures. They're not God's. God appointed Jesus at his right hand, and he has put the church in the world as his witness, the ones who obey him. But these institutions, as exiles, you look at them as mere human creations. And for that reason, they're tempted to look down upon them and perhaps rebel against them or cause trouble for them.
Yeah. Sorry, and I was listening to you while going back and just making sure I'm getting the grammar right. But you're right, because he says be subject to authority or to judgment, whatever term we want to use there. And you're right, because the word there is an adjective, to human judgments, human institutions. And so it's not a noun, it's telling us what kind of judgments they are. And they are ones that are human in nature. And we do so on account of the Lord, for his sake. And I think for some people, they would say, yeah, because, that's what God wants to work through. And there's some truth to that. I'm not saying there isn't. But I also think it's because getting caught up in those kinds of arguments is actually going to undermine our ability to talk to people about the kingdom and about Jesus. That doing it for the Lord's sake also, like I said, I'm saying this in addition to that, is to say, God, he's trying to replace that. Like, that's not my way, that's a human way. And that's part of the broken system that I want to replace. But in order to proclaim the kingdom, you got to work within that context. And don't worry about it. It's like, God can handle that. I just want to communicate the kingdom to people. For the Lord's sake, I want to invite them into something that's better and more godly and all that. So we submit just basically to keep the peace so that we can do our real work, which is to proclaim the kingdom. It's like when I talk to people about, certain political, alliances and stuff like that, I'm like, if I'm to align myself with one party or another party, all of a sudden I can't talk to people because they're only going to see me through that lens. But if I'm like, I'm not affiliated with any of this, this is just not the world that I live in, what I'm doing is I'm taking away one of the stumbling blocks that people are going to have to even having a conversation with me or listening. And so for the Lord's sake is to say there's a bigger thing that we're trying to think about here, and that is the message of the kingdom. So we submit, not a problem, no big deal. We can submit to their authorities so that we have the space that we need to be able to proclaim the kingdom.
So I would suggest it is kind of a big deal to submit. It's hard to, and I would suggest is also there's this constant tension between everything y'all are saying, sure. Like our witness needs to be sort of above board. We don't align ourselves with certain parties or certain movements, all that. However, can you protest a government or figure or a belief that's found in the government while also being subject to them? And I think that's an important question to ask right now in our day and time, because there's all sorts of protests against governments and things. And so what does that actually look like? Because kind of what I hear you saying, and I don't know if you're saying this or not, but what I hear you saying is that we just like keep our heads down and whatever. Because that's what this says. They're in charge. But does that mean we turn a blind eye to atrocities that are committed that are actually evil and wrong because it's being done by these governing authorities? So it's very messy, and I think a lot of people are struggling with, well, what is the role of a Christian? Because they've heard people who listen know what we think about these sorts of things. That we're very detached from the government. However, when the government starts doing things that is actually harming, and some would put in the category of evil, it's difficult to just keep silent.
Yeah.
So can you be subject and also not be silent?
Yeah,
at the
and
same
this
time?
passage doesn't put silence as the solution, right?
It doesn't have, it's very small, like be subject.
Yeah, right. And I think the be subject is not really the new thing. They already are subject.
Yes, that's
Right?
correct.
And be subject is not like do whatever they tell you to do, right? Be subject is accept the fact that you're in a reality where they're in charge of managing the empire and not you.
Mm-hmm.
Like recognize your place is all that means, right? But the question is, out of what motive do we recognize they're in charge and we're not? Well, for the Lord's sake, for kingdom's sake, for the sake of, though they may malign us as evildoers, they may see our honorable deeds and glorify God when they come to judge. Like our motive for being subject is for the sake of the Jesus project, for the sake of the kingdom, right? Not for the sake of laying low so they don't notice you, not for the sake of fear because they might hurt you, but your motive needs to come out of this place of they may see your good deeds and give glory to God when they come to judge. And in 15 elaborates on this more. For it's God's will that so it's God's strategy, right? It's the thing he wants to do with you is that by doing right, you should silence the ignorance of the foolish. And that is key. That I think the foolish in this sentence are the governing authorities, right? Like there's something about our witness, our emperor honoring witness that silences the foolish, even the foolish among the emperors. And you see this with Daniel and his friends, when Daniel's friends are thrown into the furnace or thrown into the lions, like they just did the right thing because it was the right thing. And then, when God shows his deliverance, the emperor shuts up. The emperor has no more shade to throw at them. The emperor, in their case, ends up giving glory to God, right? Because they did the right thing. They acted in such a way that was witness. And so I think the context of foolish says that this being subject is not like they're right, God put them in charge, they must be doing the right thing or God wouldn't have put them in that office. I think this passage goes to say, no, humans put them in office. This is a human institution. Even though that God uses it, it's a human institution, and it's filled with foolish people, right?
Yeah.
And in that context, I have to be subject. And in verse 17, I have to honor them, honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. So it doesn't say anything about do we have the right to protest? Should we protest? But I think it does says, if you're going to protest, it's going to be in a way that shows that you honor the emperor, and it's going to be, and your honor will be in such a way that God could use your positive example to draw them and their minions to him. So I think it's not a what should you do or shouldn't you do, it's what is your motive for being there? Is it the same as the political enemies of the emperor, or are you there with a different motive? And is the way you do what you do in the protests the same as what the political enemies of the emperor are doing? Or is what you're doing uniquely showing that you are free in Christ, that you realize that the emperor is a fool, right, and his minions, and that your honorable deeds are making people scratch their heads about what's going on in their life? So I think this has given us more of the how, not the what.
Okay.
I mean, do you think that lens brings anything to Christian participation in protests?
I definitely do. It's just frustrating on a couple levels because the line that gets me is 14. Governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and praise those who do right. I don't know about you guys. I don't see that as our reality. I mean, that's not what's happening too often. I mean, that the ideally, God has put these things in place to do that. But there's so many times where that doesn't seem to be happening, where people get away with murder and then others who have committed no offense or less offenses get so there's an injustice in the world that exists, at least in the systems, in the human systems we've set up.
Yeah.
there are problems. And so it would be nice to say, yeah, these people are duly elected and, we're going to trust the system. But then what system are we trusting? It's the human system that we've created, which is flawed by default. And so it's it's that tension between I get being subject, but also see that when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, there's frustration that arises, there's anger, and that leads to all sorts of actions. And of course, from our perspective, then God's the one who steps in and takes away those institutions when they're not fulfilling their jobs. That's the history of the world. But in the meantime, it's tough to just sit back and say, well, God's got it all in his hands, which he does, but it's tough to say that. And it's tough to not do anything. And so what you're saying is you can do something, but what motive are you doing something? Are you looking to fix broken systems, or are you looking to do something else? Just stand up for what is right and true. And that itself will allow people to see, your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. And so, I appreciate what you say. It's just so messy and frustrating right now, at least for me, to look around and say, I don't know that there's a solution.
Well, I think Israel found themselves in that same situation because all these diaspora Israelites are living in cities where they have temples. And like some of these cities have temples to the emperor himself, like Ephesus or Pergamum had one. And so of the many expectations is you're going to go to these temples on the appropriate day to offer up a sacrifice or to go to the parade or whatever. And Israelites had to say, we're not going to do that. Okay, we have a God, we have a temple, and we only worship that God. And we'll die rather than violate, our commitment to our God. And they found themselves in this really precarious situation under Rome, where Rome's like, we expect you to offer up sacrifices to Caesar, along with all these other gods, these local deities and things like that. And so Israel came up with a solution. No, we won't do that, but we will pray for him. And we'll offer up a sacrifice on his behalf in our temple. And Rome's like, okay, that works for us. But that was their solution. How do we honor the emperor without participating in these horrible cults that are, would put us in the same situation that sent us into exile? And so they're honoring the emperor while still honoring God. And this was a solution that they could come up with. And I think Christians were in a precarious situation because it's like, well, we're saying the same thing. We can't participate in these things, these socioeconomic, political, civic rights. But it doesn't mean that we want to overthrow the empire, at least not the way that normal people would do that. And so they have to come up with an equally, important solution to say, we will show you that we're willing to honor the empire. We're just not going to do the things that you suggest we have to do, of offering up the sacrifices or going to the parades or whatever. And we still have to do that. I guess what's hard for us is we live in a democratic society where
Right.
we elect officials. Back then, you didn't get to elect these people into office or whatever. That also presents an interesting challenge. But I think there's always a solution.
Yeah, I think that for me that's part of the problem is it's not a simple parallel, because our situation is very different, where we do actually have a say whether we want to use it or not, and so it's not we're not under threat of real punishment from standing up for what is right, for what is good. Like, whereas Christians in the first century, who knows what could have happened to them, lots of things, and so we're not under the same sort of I don't know, shadow of a fear or whatever that could happen. And so you could be more emboldened to protest more, to say more, to stand up for more. And many Christians are. And so, again, I'm just trying to like work through this, because it feels like saying and doing nothing is not right, but doing following the example is being done currently is also not right.
Well, I think you're correct. We don't just put our heads down and do nothing. Nowhere in the Bible do we see that. I think that we don't appreciate the fact, though, that not all persecution was being killed or thrown in jail or beaten or whatever.
Right.
Like, most of the persecution that Christians face, we face to this day. It's kind of the socioeconomic marginalization. It's like, you're right, we're not going to be thrown in jail. We sort of have freedom of religion. And so we're not going to face that overt kind of persecution. That doesn't mean that people don't say, fine, we just won't do business with you. And so you're going to have to deal with the financial ramifications, the social ramifications of being marginalized, which is not against the law, but we still feel those things very acutely.
I don't get too far afield, but like, ask Chick-fil-A how they're doing with that. They're just fine, right? That was attempted and it did not work.
Right.
And so I don't know how much that actually impacts Christians on a day-to-day basis.
I think sometimes you can look at Chick-fil-A and say they succeeded, and praise God, they succeeded. But I think there are Christians out there who have felt that pressure, who've lived with it, and have had to deal with the fact that, like I said, at a socioeconomic level, they've not been able to achieve. Like, Chick-fil-A kind of has the benefit that everybody loves their food and they keep showing up. It's like, fine, you can say whatever we want, but we're still doing business. But in maybe smaller situations, people are like, I can't succeed because, again, nobody's breaking the law, but they're trying to squeeze me out. And are we willing to accept that?
Yeah, I mean, what I like about this paragraph is the way it tends to transcend our two-party system, right? And, now we're in a case where Republicans are in power, and so the Christian right is very happy with governing authorities.
Yeah, we're all about honoring the emperor now.
For the most part, and then the Christian left is, can't be less happy.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. And so forget about what the unbelievers are doing right now. Right. But an election ago, right, it was reversed.
Exactly.
And so under Obama, under Biden, the Christian left was happy and they saw positive things. They were happy to honor the emperor. And the Christian right couldn't say a positive thing about the emperor. Right. So, Americans, the Christian right and left just keep flip-flop being happy and miserable. Right.
Yes.
And so I feel like this paragraph has something to say to both parties. If you are excessively happy and cozy with the powers that be, there's a reminder in here, right? Like, these are human structures, right? And they have a certain function, but you're free from them. You're aliens and exiles. They're not your people.
As much as you want,
right? They're not your people.
Yeah.
If you see them as your team, then you miss the fact that through your baptism, you no longer do what you used to do as a Gentile. You no longer get turned on or turned off by what used to turn you on or off when you were a pagan, right? Like, it reminds you of your set apartness, right? And it reminds you of the Christian perspective that these rulers are fools, that your witness should be silencing. Jesus exposed the rulers and authorities for their pretext. They pretend they do right, and promote the good and only dissuade the bad. But no, they promote the good that's on their team, and they go after the bad that's against them, right? And that just flip-flops based on which party is in power. And so this I think 17 is pretty subversive for them. Honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. The emperor only gets what everyone else gets. He doesn't get your love, and he doesn't get your fear. Right? So anyone who feels like they're in league with the powers that be right now because they happen to be more friendly to your version of Christianity, be careful how cozy you get. You are more cozy than Peter and his audience were. And you have to ask whether that coziness is a good thing. And I am not in agreement with those who say, no, it's totally different because we're a democracy. No, it's not. It's not totally different because we have a vote. Always throughout history, the masses have had an influence on their rulers. It just used to be when the rulers ticked you off, you usually formed a mob and killed them. Right? Now you vote them out of office, right? Like there was always influence. And there always is influence. And even rulers who were authoritarian autocrats had influence because those rulers still want to be liked by the masses. They still want the fear of the masses. They still want the love of the masses. And they bend over backwards to be loved by the people. Right? You see this in Jesus' crucifixion. They're killing an innocent guy. Why? To please the masses. That wasn't a democracy. It was mob influence. It was mob influence, and it was real influence, and it made a change in what the ruling authority did, and it caused the ruling authority to do what is unjust. Every society always has influence on its rulers, and to think that we're unique because we get to vote in a system where our vote arguably doesn't mean as much as most of us think.
Right.
That to me, that's just not an excuse. It doesn't transcend. Well, First Peter is not relevant to us because we're a democracy. Disagree. So I think those who are too cozy with the ruling authorities, Peter has a view of the governing authorities that is way less charitable than yours. And you have to reckon with this and whether your view, your coziness is simply not serving two masters at the expense of your loyalty to God's kingdom first. But for those who are on the other side, First Peter also has a word for you. Honor the emperor. Silence him not by revolt, not by killing, not by public shame, right? But by good deeds. It's your good deeds. It's your positive actions that are supposed to bring shame and eventually bring change of hearts and change of policies. You're doing the right thing before it's legal and whether or not it's legal. Right? They might despise you and they call you evil because you're doing illegal things, but you're doing the very things that God would call you to do. Yeah. And God uses that to change people, to change rulers, to change governing bodies that do sometimes change the policies. But it's our positive, it's our doing the right thing that is supposed to bring about change. And the context of that is honor. And so I think those who are the minority, whether it's Democrats in this world, the world of this year, or whether it was Republican under Obama and Biden, you have a calling to honor and to let your good deeds do the talking for you. And so, what it doesn't seem so to me, when you talk about protests, whatever, I want to say something, I have to say something. Well, say it with your good deeds. Say it in a way that also honors the emperor, even though he's not worthy of honor, even though he's foolish, right? Do something in a way that Peter is enjoining you to do it. And that requires a different level of creativity and simply locking arms with the political right, with the Christian right, and the political left with the Christian left, simply doing what they're doing with them the way they're doing it doesn't seem to be having the effect of the ruling authorities of the day feel shamed by your good deeds. You're being dismissed because you're doing what everyone else is doing that hates them and is considered a political enemy. And so current tactics, I'm not sure they're the most effective from Peter's standpoint or even from a logistical standpoint of what's happening on the ground.
Yep. Yeah, so I think that is something I think the Christians need to work through. You talk about creativity, like we're lacking it. because like I said, I'm out of solutions if there even exist. I'm out of ideas, and so we need to get together as the church and come up with better ideas, because what we've not been doing or doing is not working, from my perspective. So,
yeah, I agree.
All right,
That's it, I think, for today.
good enough. We got through 2 more verses. So
More than that.
Sorry.
11 through 17.
the Hyperbole.
I don't know if you've ever noticed, but we're not like passing off the reading anymore. You read the text, Sam, and then we just go from there.
Yeah, I do all the reading at this point.
Yes, you do. But you do it very well.
Sure. Well, I'll look forward to reading again next time. Until then, thanks for joining us this episode of the After Class Podcast, After Class because
The best conversations happen
After class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class Podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Social media pictures and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris. Audio mixing and editing is done by Drew Nyquist. If you've enjoyed this episode of ACP, you might also enjoy GLCC's Master of Arts in Practical Theology degree. In this 36-hour program, you will receive first-rate biblical and theological instruction from John, Ron, Sam, and several of their colleagues at Great Lakes Christian College. To learn more about this program, visit glcc.edu. Get practical and go deep at GLCC.